wanted me to communicate with you guys before.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you. We still don't have deputy mayor though, do we? Do we have a deputy mayor?
We still do not have Deputy Mayor Linda Combs on.
Okay.
We do have the remaining.
Okay, all right. So we have a motion on the floor to accept the agenda as presented for the special meeting. Madam Clerk, would you take the vote, please?
Councilmember Joe Valerius?
Yes.
Councilmember Sabrina Combs?
Yes.
Councilmember Steve Carrington?
Yes.
Councilmember Richard Best?
Yes.
Councilmember Julie Berberick?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Linda Combs is still absent at this time. Mayor Edna DeVries?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is audience participation. Anyone has the opportunity to address the council on any subject, 3 minutes if you're representing yourself and 5 minutes if you're representing a group. Audience participation is now open. Okay, seeing no one come forward, I will close audience participation. The next item is new business and the Committee of the Whole, the presentation of the audit on the 2019 budget. And note, action may be taken by the council following the Committee of the Whole. Do I have a motion to go into the Committee of the Whole?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we go into the Committee of the Whole. Is there questions, amendments to the motion? There's somebody in the waiting room. So maybe wait and see if that is. Okay, there we are. Okay, Deputy Mayor, we just finished. We're at F on the special City Council meeting agenda. We do have a motion on the floor to go into the Committee of the Whole. And so the clerk is going to call the roll for the motion to go into the Committee of the Whole. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Joe Valerius?
Yes.
Councilmember Sabrina Combs?
Yes.
Councilmember Steve Carrington?
Yes.
Councilmember Richard Best?
Yes.
Councilmember Julie Berberick?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Linda Combs? You're still muted, Deputy
see.
Mayor Linda Combs.
She's
Shaking her head, yes. We
okay.
acknowledge the head, yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
No, she's shaking her head yes.
Yes, thank you. And Mayor Edna DeVries?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so now, John, do I turn this over to you for the introduction, or Gina, or do the people online just, who wants to speak first? How do we handle this section? Okay, go ahead. John.
So good evening. I have Finance Director Gina Davis introduce this. This is our 2019 audit. I think you'll be very pleased with our audit. All the credit goes to Gina and her team, and of course our staff on follow rules and direction. So you're really in good hands financially, and this is not the first time. Ms. Davis has a long history on being a great steward for the city of Palmer.
Right, yep, true. You ready? Can you
Madam-
switch the camera, please?
Switching camera.
Okay. She's gonna put the camera on you.
Madam Mayor, members of the council,
Uh-huh.
I'd like to introduce Joy Mariner and Dimitri. I'm going to slaughter your last name, Dimitri. From VDO auditing firm, and take it away.
Okay,
Great.
okay. Did I see some council,
Thank you for
John,
having us here with you and the council today. First off, I want to thank Gina, as Mr. Ruby said, I mean, she just does an excellent job with so much. And the audit process this year was like none other that we have had. And been your auditor for a few years, BDO, and McKenna Coachella have been your auditors for longer. And I've been talking to my governmental clients for years about how much fund balance you have available in reserve, how many months of expenditures you have available for any sort of crisis that might arise, and here we are. So, this has been a very unusual year. We were set and scheduled to start your audit the third week of March. And as you can imagine, that threw things a little bit of wrench and everything because we did not show up in your office the third or last week in March. We were not able to come at all. And I will say, I have Dimitri Petrograd with me, Dimitri's been the manager or senior on your engagement for many years and is very familiar with the city's operations. And he and Gina just did a spectacular job of working together with your team to make sure the audit still was done and done timely. There have been extensions granted, lots of extensions for the audit reports and things, but you haven't needed to pursue any of those. Your audit was issued on time, everything went swimmingly, we were able to get the information that we needed, it just speaks pretty highly to the level of professionalism that your staff has. So what my goal would be on the audit partner in your engagement, my goal would be to just walk through a few basic items on the financial statements themselves, and then also to walk through the results of the audit, which really I work for you as the city council, just to make sure that your books and records are in order, that you're compliant with laws and regulations and grant agreements. We would report anything that we would find to you directly, because not only do professional standards dictate it, but that's your role, is you're charged with governance of your city. You are charged with making sure that your city is operating effectively and in compliance with laws and regulations. So our job is to come in behind your team and make sure that that's the case. So what we've got here is hopefully two handouts that came to you earlier. One is the actual financial statements themselves, and the other is what we call the audit wrap-up. And I'd like to go ahead and start with the audit wrap-up, which this is extremely boring for a very non-boring year. 2020 has been not boring in a lot of ways, but if there's anything boring about 2020's audit report, I would love you to hear that there's nothing very exciting to report. Now, keep in mind this is for your 2019 audit. So we do the audit in 2020, but it's based on our work is around the activity that happened in 2019. Now, there is a section in the auditing standards where we do need to look at what's called subsequent events, things that happen after year end. And obviously, COVID-19 happened after year end. So there is a new disclosure in your statements that is new this year related to basically the potential and actual fallout of COVID-19 on the city, some of which is still not known at the time this was issued. But if you look at that audit wrap-up and you turn with me to page 3, the status of our audit. The status of our audit is done. It's been issued. We actually have the draft in line to go to the clearinghouse at the White House. You have to submit your single audit report to the federal government. We've already submitted the report itself to the state of Alaska, and it was issued at the end of August. Really, we were pretty much ready to issue in June. Gina had everything, all our ducks in order, things went really well. It was delayed by a lot of work that had to go into her team had to spend on getting a lot of the CARES Act provisions figured out and a lot of work that they were dealing with. And so we didn't put finishing touches on it in August, but all the work was done primarily in April and May. The report drafted in June, and we're essentially done with all of our field work and ready to go by the end of June this year. So right on time with what we would expect and what we would want. If you turn with me to the next page 4, a couple quick things. No major changes this year to your financial statements in terms of your accounting standards and practices and the way that you account for things. You did adopt a new financial statement standard this year, but that's the standard that delayed implementation. With COVID-19, they gave you the option of delaying implementation of some of the standards, which you did elect to do. So that just means you adopted a standard that says you don't have to adopt all the standards you are going to have to adopt, which definitely was the right way to go. It buys you a little time to get some of those things figured out. I'll touch briefly on what those are and what's coming up. When you look at your significant estimates, there weren't any big changes to your estimates. Estimates are things that are not hard and fast numbers, meaning you know that there's $1 in your bank statement, but you do not know exactly how much you're going to pay in incurred liabilities for the next, 30 years. Or you know how much you billed your customers, but you don't exactly know how much they're going to pay. There may be some allowance for an uncollectible account. We don't believe any of your estimates to be very significant in terms of the judgment that your management team has to put into them. The state of Alaska determines the first liability and that's net OPEB liability, so you don't have any say in that. And for the most part, you have really good collectability on your receivables, so there aren't significant reserves in place for many of those areas. Now, it may be different as 2020 goes along, and we may see some collectability issues come out of this year. But for 2019, no major changes there. And then when we look at our audit results in terms of corrected misstatements or areas that we found that were problems, nothing came to our attention that we brought to the attention of management. Every year we assist with booking your pension liability. That information doesn't come out very timely and it's very complex. So we assist with booking those across all of your funds that receive those. And then there was one adjustment that we worked through with Gina related to unbilled revenue in the water sewer fund. Again, these are things she knows about. They aren't things that are problems. It's more technical assistance than an audit adjustment. And there were no misstatements that we found that were not corrected by your team this year either. So really, those are when you look at the biggest results of an audit, the audit adjustments are one of the major things to look for. Are your financial statements that you're receiving throughout the year, are they accurate? If we have a lot of adjusting journal entries at year end, then you might question whether or not you're getting accurate financial information throughout the year. But that's not the case here. The financial statements that we audited once they were closed and the books and records closed by your team were solid and no concerning journal entries related to the audit process itself, which is exactly what we want. I try really hard to find audit adjustments, I'll tell you. Part of what you hire us to do is make sure your books and records are materially correct. And so our teams, we actually brainstorm where there might be adjustments that need to be recorded, what things might be getting done wrong, where are there risks that there are misstatements, or risks that somebody might either want to or maybe doesn't have the capability to do an adjustment correctly. So we actually go through that brainstorming process to think about it, and then we look into those specific areas. So nothing came out of that process that would result in an error in your financials. That's not to say there couldn't be errors in your financials. We don't test everything, and we use sampling methodology. If something's off $50 and it's just a timing difference, we're not going to care about it. But if it's off $50 and it's because somebody stole $50, then I care a lot about it. So then the amount that we care about depends somewhat on the nature of the errors that we find and the assumptions that go into it. But everything that we consider to be significant is subject to some level of testing, whether it's a sample or just testing all of the balances in that particular account. When you look at the next page in terms of results, and I won't spend a whole lot of time in here except to say that this all looks fairly straightforward, no significant unusual transactions this year, no alternative treatment. You do have, as I mentioned, you did adopt GASB Statement 95, which is basically says we're not going to implement a bunch of standards. We're going to take the option to wait. And then there is a footnote here on subsequent events related to COVID-19 and CARES. The big thing for you is that at the time this was issued and even now, you don't know yet what the full impact of that will be. It's likely I'm sure you're seeing changes to sales taxes. I'm sure you're seeing impact to timing of payments. The CARES Act money is noted here as well. The CARES Act money came in, but then there's all the work it takes to actually spend it and spend it properly. So, nobody can really estimate the full impact of it, but it's not an impact in 2019. It will hit your financial statements in 2020. Any questions before we keep moving? I know I'm talking a lot, and it's a talking head, it's not even a talking joy, so, questions before we move on to internal controls and the financial?
I don't see any hands raised,
Okay,
so go ahead and proceed. Thank you.
thanks, and, please feel free to use the reactions and, the thumbs up if you've got a question, and I'll stop. I know with the video chat, it's a little bit harder to get, well, we can all just wave, I guess, but, feel free to get my attention if you did have a question along the way. So on page 6, this is, related to internal control over financial reporting. So internal controls are precisely that. They're checks and balances there at the city. They aren't things that the auditor does. It's not the auditor's responsibility to make sure the financial statements are right. It's the city's responsibility to make sure the financial statements are right. We come in later and make sure the financial statements are materially correct, right? But that's a double check. It's the back end of review. It's not a control. The controls can be two types, and I bring this up just because I think it's something that's not considered all the time. One is a preventive control. So you would not have somebody who has access to the check stock also be a check signer, for example. It's just a good way of preventing somebody from taking a check, signing it, and walking away with money. And then there also are detective controls where you have somebody check on the back end to make sure that the check was written to an established vendor, or that the check signer matches an approved check signer. But by then, the check's already been written and it's already been signed. So a bank reconciliation is a great detective control, but not a great preventive one. So when we come in and do an audit, we are tasked with understanding your controls, evaluating your controls, and to the extent that we consider them to be significant, we also look to make sure they were implemented. So for example, with what we call segregation of duties or management override, if Gina sees a journal entry that one of her staff posted and she doesn't like it, can she just fix it or change it? Can she post an entry maybe without review? And I bring up Gina's name just because typically the higher level employees tend to be the highest risk in terms of their ability to do things, because you've placed the most trust in them. And that's not a bad thing. Certainly she deserves that trust and has proven that over the years. But we do test the journal entries that Gina posts specifically because there's less review over those. So it'd be harder to find somebody who's capable of reviewing that there at the city. So we look for things that maybe don't have an adequate level of control review, or we look for areas maybe that somebody at a high level is doing something without as much review above them. We're happy to report no items findings this year. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that could be improved from an efficiency perspective or even from a best practice perspective. I'm sure there's always things we can do better. But your team tends to go on the conservative side of the controls and the review. Your team, for good reason, right? They want to make sure they do things right and nothing gets missed. And so what we would report to you is anything that we felt you needed to take action on. Anything that we thought a new policy needs to be in place, or you need to have oversight in this particular area, that we think it could cause a significant financial statement problem. So no findings in internal control, things are operating very smoothly. I know I was on the phone with Gina and a lot of my clients, once we all went remote, because a lot of controls changed pretty quickly. And so that's something that you should just be asking about as policies and procedures change, as workers are remote, or they're moving more remote or less remote or back from being remote. The checks and balances are changing a lot this year compared to last year. So the review processes are changing, the way people are documenting things or tracking things is going electronic in a lot of ways. So this is one of those kind of key times in a life cycle of an accounting department. So there can be big changes to controls in 2020, and it's probably just worth being aware of and watching your financial statement information closely, making sure you understand it and asking questions along the way. One of the internal controls we look at is the city council meeting minutes. We look at these special meeting minutes, we look at the meeting minutes of your regular meetings. Are you getting the information? Are you looking at it? Are you asking questions about it? So you're part of the internal control process as well. That tone at the top is a very important element of it. Otherwise, page 7 is exactly what you want to see. Nothing exciting to report. no violations of laws or regulations, no identified fraud or abuse. We will get everything we needed from your team. Excellent team you have to work with. And certainly I prefer to be in person at least some of the time with you during the audit, just because I'm a people person and I really like Palmer. But I couldn't be there in person this year, but hopefully next year that can be the case. And just the fact that we had no significant difficulties this year is kind of a miracle. Just a real testament to your team's ability to work hard and get what we needed done. Otherwise, the rest of this wrap-up just kind of talks about some of the standards that are coming up. On page 9, there's some new information related to asset retirement obligations. I talked briefly with Gina about this. Really, right now, state and federal regulations are such that like wastewater treatment facilities probably would in theory be applicable here, but probably right now there aren't any known closure costs associated with that. So Gina will have an evaluation on that this year. Just be aware of that. I don't think it'll have a significant change to your statement. And then coming up in the future, there's some changes to capitalizing interest costs. I'm not going to go into that. I don't expect this to be a significant change on your statement. And then in 2022, there is a big change. There's actually two. One is, and this is on page 11 if you're following along. One is leases. Almost every municipal government has leases. You're leasing things to other people or you're leasing things from people. Usually you're leasing to others. Leases will no longer be accounted for the same way. So the biggest, most important thing is for any lease that's longer than 1 year, you absolutely have to know what all of your leases are, and accounting has to know what they are. And you as a city council over the next 2 years, if you're being asked to approve a lease, please just have in the back of your mind, oh, Joy warned me, I should ask that question. What impact will this have on our financial statement? If it's $1, I'm not worried, right? But if you have a significant lease agreement, it will go in your financial statement, and it's never been, for the most part, it hasn't been in there before. So that's going to be a bit of a project, just to make sure you have a comprehensive list of what they are. Yes, Madam Mayor, go ahead.
So on leases, and the ones I'm thinking about are the airport, right? Because I think those are all more than a year, right? So now will they be listed then as an obligation or as an asset, or where exactly on the balance sheet will they be listed?
In the case of the airport, because it's an enterprise fund, it would be reported as an asset receivable essentially,
Okay.
that they owe you the money, and the liability would be an obligation to lease the space or the land to them.
Okay.
So it actually shows up as an asset and a liability. It really doesn't change too much, it doesn't change your operations. You still record the amount that you are receiving as payment. Although technically you have to straight line the lease. So if there are, step ups in place, you take the whole life of the lease and then straight line it for that. So if it's kind of 1,000 1 year and then 2,000 and 3,000, it doesn't matter. You add up the total lease payments divided by the number of years, and that's how you recognize the revenue, which is different than the terms of the lease. So
Right.
I think attorneys and vendors like to negotiate these kinds of things to be creative and get people into the space, and that's all fine and good. But accounting is pretty straightforward and has to be amortized over the life itself.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and also the leases on like the railroad property that we have going down through town. Now, will those be in the general fund then?
So I think some of those leases are pretty small in dollar amount.
They are.
Some of them are also not more than a year. Gina can correct me if I'm wrong. I would recommend that you establish some sort of threshold where maybe you track the leases. This is a great time to put together a comprehensive list of all of your leases and work with your attorneys. And I'm kind of recommending somebody hire a summer intern that needs a job and pay him a little bit to come in and just gather all the lease documents, put them all in a spreadsheet, make it all look good and pretty. But I think if you would consider doing some sort of threshold under which you don't bother doing the accounting for it, I think that's the wisest track. I mean, you don't want to create a huge burden for your accounting team. and I'm not worried about leases that are insignificant in total. You know, if you have one lease that's $10,000 a year for 2 years, it's $20,000, maybe it's not material, but if it's $10,000 a year for 20 years, then it's a whole lot more in
Okay.
total. So you have to consider not just the annual lease, but also the life of the lease itself.
Okay, okay, good. Thank you.
Other questions on leases? The other thing we're seeing on this page is some cities are being asked to do what's called conduit debt. So because you can issue bonds, a nonprofit might come to you and say, hey, can you issue a bond kind of for us? And we use your bonding power, but we pay the bond off, and you don't have to come up with any money to do it. And those are all fine arrangements. A lot of our cities do them. Just know that they are changing the disclosures and some of the information required on conduit debt. And so if you are accepting conduit debt, it puts the burden on your team, on your accounting team to report that. It's not free to you as a city as much as it's pitched that way. It does take time for your team to negotiate that every single year going forward for the life of that bond. It's not a bad thing. I mean, if it's a you know, an entity you really want to support, you know, that's a decision you could certainly make. Just know that it does come at a time cost anyway to your accounting staff.
Okay, so, Joy, on that bond, I think we do have, I don't know, is the one we do, I see Gina shaking her head, yes, I thought we had one that was that. So it would be picked up then in the general fund as a general obligation, long-term obligation, and then their payments, would we have them as a future receivable? Or how, so is it offset then for really a zero impact on our financial statements? Or can you explain that a little bit further? Thanks.
They fought really hard to not have it go on your financial statements themselves.
Oh, okay.
And so this standard still continues to keep it off of your balance sheet, although the original thought process was we would have to have it on there. Now instead, it's just being recorded very differently across different governments nationwide. Some people are recording it, some people are not recording it, some people are disclosing certain things, and other people are disclosing other things, and there's just no consistency in practice.
Mm-hmm.
So the standard does basically clarifies what is a conduit debt obligation, and these types of conduit debt agreements are typically conduit debt obligations, and then it expands on the level of disclosure you need to have in the statements themselves, just in the footnote.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So those are the main things coming up. There's other ones coming up here if you're going to do public-private partnerships, or if you're going to do subscription IT arrangements. Actually, that's pretty common. A lot of people are kind of subscribing to IT software instead of purchasing it outright. So there are some statements that are coming up. You have some time on those. That's 2023, so I'm not going to bother you right now. But just know that they're actively coming out with new rules that we get to follow, and we're all so excited about it. But we'll help as best we can to make sure that you're navigating those as efficiently as possible. What my whole thing is there's no reason you should spend a lot of time and money on any of these things. That's not the point of them. But the GASB does come out with them, and you have to comply with them. So whatever we can do to help you be efficient in applying them, we'll do.
Okay.
That's the end of the wrap up. I would love to go into the statements, but before I do that, any questions on the wrap up before I highlight a few key points on the statements themselves?
I don't see any questions, so proceed, thank you.
Okay. So the financial statements themselves are your audited financials, and as I mentioned, these are the responsibility management. We do help Gina and her team prepare some of the information in the statements themselves, but it comes from all of the information they give us. So they give us the information, we drop it into a Word Excel file, we assist with some of the reporting and disclosure wording, those kinds of things. One thing I'd like to highlight, starting on page 7, is your management's discussion and analysis. And so Gina actually writes this based on, it's almost like an annual report of what happened this year at the city, or in 2019 at the city. What are the increases and decreases and why? What loans maybe have been approved coming up? So if you read nothing else in your spare time as a city council member, I would really encourage you to look at this. And I realize that public service is a huge ask and it's a lot of dedication to your community. But this will give you some really good talking points. Did you know in 2019 this happened? Or in 2019 we, decreased our outstanding loans and bonds payable down to this amount of money. So depending on kind of what you find interesting, I really encourage you to read that because it gives you a lot of information about how your statements are written, what they mean, and what's included in them. So 7, 8 goes on for quite some time, and it gives you some historical information, comparisons from last year to this year as well, and then even some charts and budget information, and it's on page 19. So I realize that's 13 pages, pages 7 to 19, 13 pages of information. But again, I'm not going to go through the MD&A in detail. We actually don't audit the MD&A. It's entirely on Gina and her team to draft this and to put in the explanations. We do look to make sure it's consistent with the financial information as a whole. But the basic financial statements start on page 22. It skips over the audit
Joy?
opinion, although I did mention in the audit wrap-up oh, yes, please, Madam Mayor.
Before you go any further, I noticed for 2019, you have John Moosey as the city manager. He is our city manager now, but he was not our city manager in 2019. So is it supposed to be the person that was the city manager in 2019, or is it the current person?
It's based on the date, well, I guess, Gina, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but the information you put on here is usually based on the date of issuance, although it doesn't look like that was totally updated everywhere. So I'm not certain. We actually don't even audit that
Right.
information.
Yeah, I just thought for future times. So I just didn't know what the procedure was and what the standard was there, so.
It's an excellent question.
Yeah, Mayor, since it's a very good audit, I think it should be me.
Go ahead, John, sorry.
So, okay, go ahead and go, Joy. I just
Okay.
didn't notice that, so, okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the statement of net position starts on 22, page 22. I won't spend too much time on this because this is showing all of the city's assets and liabilities at December 31st. But it does give you a high-level picture, and it shows all your long-term assets, not the fund-level assets, but just kind of the government-wide long-term assets and liabilities. So on here, you can see things like capital assets, that are being depreciated or not being depreciated. You have over $100 million in capital assets, and just note that's not your cost. That's net of depreciation.
Okay.
So the total cost on your capital assets is far higher. You have governmental capital assets of about 48 million, and then on your enterprise funds, there's another 130 million. So total cost is much higher than that number. You also see, total cash and investments, 6.8 million, other major categories of assets there. And then on the next page, when you look at your overall liabilities, these are things you owe to others at the end of the year. The biggest ones there are your loan payables and water, and that's mostly wastewater loans, and your net pension liability. I remind people that net pension liabilities are not great, but they are not things that you can pay off. They are what they are, and you'll pay them off over the next however long anybody who's in the pension system lives. It will have either a pension liability or a pension asset. If we ever get to the place where PERS is overfunded, I think we'll all cheer and skip and do a little dance. But for now, it's underfunded, and that's your portion of the pension liability. There's also your portion of the other post-employment benefits liability. That's the health and disability plan that's associated. There's actually 3 OPEB plans associated with PERS. That liability did go down this year, just so you know, from a statewide level. Then let's move on to page 25, because I think this is really where we want to touch on a few highlights. This is your fund level for your governmental fund balance sheet, and it's mostly showing you the general fund. Your non-major funds are primarily your capital project funds or some grant funds, those kinds of things. But when you look at your general fund there, your total assets in the general fund are $6.8 million primarily. Those are cash and investments and amounts that other funds owe the general fund. You have a little bit of receivables as well. But when you look down at fund balance, a lot of your fund balance is tied up in advances to other funds. And that's primarily to the enterprise fund. And then you have unassigned fund balance. This is again at the end of 2019 of $3.36 million. And if you turn with me to page 27, your total expenditures are at just over $11 million in the general fund. So that gives you a sense of your total kind of reserves. Now you need to have working capital. You can't just spend all of your reserves. You have to have some amount of money for the timing differences of when you receive invoices, when you pay bills, when you owe your employees, when you get your taxes money in, right? So that it's really important that you have some level of fund balance there to sustain your city through a crisis. And here we are in a crisis, right? And so that's something that cash flow becomes a bigger issue when there's actually a lack thereof. So hopefully, and I know that Gina's been informing you of that, but it's something to really pay attention to. And as you move forward out of this crisis, work towards whatever level of fund balance, unrestricted money you'd like to see for your city. Some of our cities are even budgeting for surpluses, essentially, to build up those reserves over time. Now, certainly not this year. It's not the year to be budgeting for a surplus. But that's something that moving forward, as we recover, is something to have a good long-term goal. Questions on any of that? We'll look at a few things on expenditures as well, and then we'll look at the enterprise fund. These should be pretty familiar numbers, the same numbers you would have seen this spring prior to COVID-19. So let's move on to the enterprise fund. That's on page 29 and 30. And 31. So I'll cover those 3 pages and then open up to last questions. When you look at your proprietary funds, these are your enterprise funds. Water, sewer, and airport, the biggest ones there. You have the golf course and some other enterprise funds as well. When you look at your assets, not surprisingly, most of your assets are in capital assets, right? Keep in mind that this includes the amount of the assets that was paid for with grant funds. So a large portion of the assets themselves are not paid for with your own money or with loans. In the past anyway, and especially the airport recently, a lot of those improvements have been made with grant funding. When you look at your liabilities on page 30, your largest liabilities there are your loans payables in the water sewer fund, DEC loans primarily 1.5%. A lot of those have been getting, I've seen it over the last 5 to 10 years, some of those loans getting forgiven or a portion of them forgiven. That's to the extent you can do the water sewer project with loans instead of bonds, you've been able to do that. So that's excellent, good management on the city's part. You also have advanced money to the enterprise fund from the general fund to cover operating losses. When you look at page 31, one of the things that's really, I just want to spend 1 more minute on these enterprise funds because I think it's very important to note. So you do have operating losses in most of your enterprise funds, specifically in the water, sewer, and the airport fund. Keep in mind, however, that depreciation number is a non-cash expense. So that's not actually cash that leaves the door each year. That's money that left the door a while ago. So when you look at the water sewer fund, you have total loss there of $465,000, but there's $2 million of depreciation. That being said, you do need to charge enough in the water sewer fund to be able to pay your debt payment. The principal on your long-term debt has to get paid. You have $125,000 of interest that got spent last year, and then principal payments, last year were about $300,000, but that's not the case going forward. So that's somewhere to really watch are your charges that you're charging to your customers. And again, this year is a weird year. I get it. 2020 is not the year to be spiking up a bunch of rates. But it does need to be, to some extent, you need to have sustainable activities as you move forward. And you do have debt payments that are about that $300,000 to $325,000 a year in those funds that do need to be made and paid for somehow. So whether that's can be paid for with general fund money or water sewer money is kind of your choice.
Okay.
My face just started glowing in the Zoom chat. My apologies. So those are the main kind of financial statement highlights I wanted to touch on. We already touched on a new disclosure related to COVID-19 when we looked at the audit wrap-up. But if you have an appetite for that kind of thing, there is more information in the notes. That's on page 68. The notes themselves just give you a lot more information about the numbers that we've already discussed. You can see what your cash and investments are made up of, or all the activity that happened this year on capital assets. And so I just encourage you, if you have a question on any specific account, to look to the notes for more information about it, or to look at the MD&A and find out more information about that specific account. There's about, 15 pages of pension notes that are required. You definitely don't want to go through that. And then in the back of the statement, there is more information about your pension and fund level detail, which is really good to have. And this is one of those documents that should be around forever at the city, or at least for 30 years. So having that fund level detail in the record, the permanent record, is really helpful. And then I'll finish on page 152. I realize I'm jumping. I didn't get 3 hours for this meeting, so I'm going to jump through the 153 pages that you have. So when you look at page 152, we did conduct a federal single audit this year. We're required to do that as part of our, you're required to have us do that as part of your single audit requirements for your grant. We did audit the airport improvement program. This is not an easy program to administer. I'll just tell you that the program requirements are pretty robust. You have to follow procurement requirements, and there's some rules that the AIT program that the Department of Transportation requires you to follow that are pretty stringent, and the approvals that you have to get are kind of annoying. But anyhow, we did not identify any findings associated with that program this year. And so that's excellent news. I fully anticipate in 2020 that we will be required to audit your CARES Act grant. So that's something to really be supportive of your team about. Document is what I'm telling everybody, and so Gina heard me say that. Document what you approve as a council, document how the money's getting spent, document why you think it's allowable, follow the rules. Unfortunately, we're all operating a little bit in the dark because the compliance supplement for this funding stream has not come out yet. So they're asking people to spend it, but we don't actually know what we're going to have to audit on the back end yet. So it's very unusual, and that will come out in October, supposedly. So we'll see. As soon as I have it, I will share it with you, but I know your team's doing everything they can to be conservative and to follow the guidance that we do have. So stay out of the news on that one, and I'm happy to help. I try to be as helpful as I can be throughout, just make sure that we can identify where there may be problems with compliance on CARES in 2020. With that, I'll open it up to more questions, and Gina, if you have anything I missed, please let me know and chime in.
Okay. Does any of the council have any questions or comments? It's my understanding when we come out of the committee of the whole, we will need to have a motion by the council to accept the 2019 audit. Is that correct, clerk? Yeah.
That's what we have done in the past, yes.
Yeah, okay. So anyone, last chance for any questions? Well, thank you, Joy. I think you did an excellent presentation, and we, of course, are very pleased with our finance department and the work that Gina has done over the years as well as this year, and probably even be more pleased in a year from now when we've gone through the audit for the CARES money, so, which we know she's been very faithful and very concerned about how to spend those things. And I know our rest of our staff at the City of Palmer is checking with her for every penny that they're requesting. So we look forward to having a good report for that, unless they change some of the requirements drastically on us within the next 3 months. So anyway.
So far they've only done less restrictive.
Mhm.
So that is good news. It seems that, at the beginning, everybody was freaked out, and then now we can do this, and now we can do this. So I'm hoping the compliance supplement comes out and it, makes everybody smile, take a deep breath, and actually not work the weekend.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay.
So,
Somebody trying to say something? We want to wrap this up in the next 2 or 3 minutes because everybody will have to sign off and come back in for our 7 o'clock meeting. So, but did I hear somebody maybe trying to get on? Okay, I don't see any hands raised or anything. So we are out of the committee of the whole, and what is the wishes of the council?
Madam Mayor,
Yes?
Madam Mayor, this is the Deputy Mayor, Linda Combs,
Uh-huh,
and I would like to, let me be sure, we are out of the committee role.
right, yes, uh-huh.
Okay, then I would like to make a motion that, the council, accept the audit on the 2019 budget as presented this evening.
Okay, is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any questions, comments, amendments to the motion? Okay, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll for the vote on the motion, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Jill Valerius.
Yes.
Councilmember Sabrina Combs.
Yes.
Councilmember Steve Carrington.
Yes.
Councilmember Richard Best.
Yes.
Councilmember Julie Berbrick.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Linda Combs.
Yes.
Mayor Edna DeVries.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have a record of items placed on the table?
Nothing tonight.
Okay. Any council member comments? Now, as I mentioned, you will have to sign off from this meeting and then sign on, and you'll have to be back on by 7 o'clock for the next meeting. But any other council comments? Okay, so with that, I will adjourn the special meeting.